Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
A woman in southeast Ohio claimed that a tribe of Bigfoot would harass her and the woman's family, beginning in 1962. At one point, when she was 12 years old, she was held captive in a cave by the creatures. The woman, who is now in her early 60s, requested to remain anonymous and to not reveal the Appalachia location where the incidents occurred. She stated,
"I prefer not to say where this took place, specifically. No one wants an invasion of Bigfoot hunters on private lands. Let people go to the public lands, like the Wayne National Forest, to look for Bigfoot. People down in the hills love where they live because it's quiet, there's fresh air, clean water, great conditions for raising gardens and children, and being in the thick of nature to see the wild animals up close is something they all value very much. I'd rather that people work harder on gathering the mountain of eyewitness reports and experiences that's been hidden in the past decades in this state than to see them destroying nature."
According to her, she wasn't the only one experiencing the encounters. She continued,
"The creatures were witnessed, in part, by my parents. People do need to know that these things happened to me. It still pains me greatly, but at least I can talk about it now in some part, though without anyone knowing who I am. People are absolutely cruel."
The woman also said that the incidents happened too often to keep a record of them, and that some of the neighbors had similar experiences, including some young boys fishing in a nearby river. These events were supposedly reported to the local police. She also states that, at one point, the huge Bigfoot came back to take her, and her father shot it with a 12-gauge shotgun.
"The big one that had always come to take me out of my bedroom at night came this time during the day. Dad was about 15 feet from it. The shot was hitting this thing, and every time it hit, he'd stomp really hard on the ground with one foot after the other. My brothers and I ran up to my bedroom because the youngest said it was higher ground for a better defense. And there were moreover in the farmer's drainage ditch across the road. They were huge too. I mean, what do you do as a kid and you see something like that? Good thing my 3 brothers were there with me to help protect me. I yelled to them to leave or they would be hurt. They finally left. But there were a lot of days where we did not leave our 3 acres. My brothers wanted to go check on the neighbors to see if they were okay or needed help."
She claims that the Bigfoot were of different sizes, male and female, but that the biggest one was a 14 feet tall male with a head that was at least the size of a basketball.
His hair was long and about the same texture as mine, as I recall. The hair on all of them was about the same shade of brown, like the color of the decomposed wood layer in the forest. I could see skin around his eyes that was tanned and where there was facial hair. It was more sparse, with glimpses of skin showing through that area as well. I couldn't make out my neck. His chin was broad, and his teeth were about the size of the nail on my middle finger, but they were more flat, and he had a mouthful of them, meaning the width of his bite was wide. His mouth was wide enough to show most of them. His eyes were dark with some white around them, less so than human eyes. There were crow's feet at the outer edge of them. His skin was weathered like anyone who spent much time outside, like a farmer. His shoulders were very broad, though I did see his collarbone on one side, which looked thick compared to a human's. He was muscular and heavily built, but in no way fat. There was an adult female and others who were almost as big as the female but didn't seem to be young or old. I don't know if they were all related, but they seemed like a close-knit group. So, there was the adult male and female who seemed to be a couple, and the 2 others that seemed to have maturity and body mass suggest that they were what we'd consider 40-something humans. Other than that, I couldn't tell what age any of them were."
The woman describes being taken captive.
"Many of my memories of these creatures were so traumatic that my mind hid them from me. I've no idea what else I've experienced with them in my childhood, yet. You see, the memories are still popping up to the surface, and I've got to tell you it's not a pleasant thing to know you've been taken innumerable times by these creatures across many hills far from your home. I've no idea what transpired while I was with them, but each time they took me I was out all night long.
She suffered in other ways as well.
I was being used in a tug of war and neither side was winning. Certain people at nearby churches were told what was going on, so they'd take me aside and anoint me with oil and lay hands on me, praying out loud, and all I wanted to do was lay down and go to sleep from that circus. I was confined to the house for weeks, not being allowed to look out any windows."
She states that most times her captivity was peaceful, but occasionally the creatures became violent.
I was probably around 12 when I woke up underground in a cave that was dripping water from roots I could see stretching below the ground. You can't imagine the horror. I was screaming my lungs out, and after a while I ran out of force to make any sounds, but the air kept coming out of me. I could see these creatures surrounding me as I lay there unable to move on this great slab of rock. I wanted badly to scream some more, but I was just too tired to do that anymore. When I relaxed, they all started smiling and laughing. I thought, okay, they could have killed me and eaten me, but they didn't. Some of them are kind, but then again, I've seen cats play with mice for hours before they kill and eat them.
She says that she remembers everything clearly, and so does her family.
These were clearly not childhood nightmares, as evidenced by the incident that took place around the time I was 12 or 13. Mom asked me questions each time the big Bigfoot, came back to my window and took me with him. He took me with him many times. After talking to me to get me to tell the big guy not to take me with him, and that they told me to tell him no, I wasn't going, and that not seeming to work, she pretty much gave up asking me anything. She did talk to Dad about how to stop this from happening, that she thought it was affecting my health and robbing us all of our sleep. There was the concern that if they did the wrong thing, this creature could kill everyone in the house. Mom often wept to my older sisters about this big hairy thing that got into the chicken coop and how she needed their help to convince Dad to do something to stop this before someone got hurt. She told them not to go near me and told me not to go near them. She was quite fearful, and I can't blame her.
Then the family decided to move her bed downstairs, but this appeared to frustrate the large male Bigfoot.
I remember hearing him pecking at my window upstairs, but I was strictly forbidden from leaving the area for any reason. He'd bang on the side of the house, and Dad would yell at him to go away, that he wasn't going to see me anymore, and that was that. He made these loud grunts and stomping on the ground to show his displeasure. I'd hear his thoughts in my head as if he was asking where I was. One day, when I was 19, we were on my parents' front stoop talking. Before I left, there was this very long, very loud, deep scream, like a man was getting murdered up the road in the woods. Sound did carry, especially on cold nights, but this had excessive volume to it, and no one human could have ever held a full-on scream that long. I thought someone was being hurt up there, and my dad refused to call the sheriff's office to report it. I thought my dad had lost it.
But she says she called the sheriff when she returned home.
The things they said really made me wonder if they were scared of the woods. I asked if they couldn't look for vehicle tracks or boot prints up that lane to the gate. And they finally said they'd go down there the next day to check. They appreciated that I described the place, and it helped them feel more at ease. They kept saying the station policy was not to go into the woods for any reason.
The neighbors and other kids at school also spoke of their personal encounters.
We weren't talking about our experiences with them, but we were listening to what others were having to deal with at their places. They called them monsters, creatures, monkey men, giants, etc. We listened to what other neighbors would tell us about them because they thought no one was likely to believe kids that heard it and passed it on. The neighbors next door never spoke about their experiences.
The woman also added,
Many times I've read authors saying they wish they knew. They wish those who knew would share what they know with the world. Well, that's why I've shared this. Talking about these things has not been easy. I hope it brings awareness to the suffering of experiencers and witnesses and allows them to speak openly about what has happened to them. Unless we all speak the truth, the world won't know what's been hidden and still being hidden from us. Do we want future generations to carry on living the same lie? Our world is richer and more interesting than most people could ever imagine. These are not just creatures, they are quite intelligent and resourceful enough to keep from being caught or killed.
I live in Southern California and had a sighting one night when I was about 24. We were driving home around midnight and approaching Avenue K and 150th Street East in Lancaster, California. As we approached the intersection, I saw something move in the dark, then it turned its head and looked at us. I know this because of the eye shine, and it was well above a sign it walked out from behind. It stared the entire time it crossed the road. I made my turn on Ave K and sped off. When I got home, I called the sheriff to see if there was a report of a disturbance, as whatever it was came out of the yard of a ranch and we heard dogs barking all night. The sheriff asked what kind and I said animal. He asked what kind and I got a bit evasive. He ran down a list of critters we have in the area, even rare critters like bears. I said no to everything and he got annoyed and asked what exactly I was asking. So I described in detail what I saw. He says without missing a beat, well, you know, it could have been Bigfoot. I told him not to patronize me. He says, no, Bigfoot has been reported in our area, and with the drought, everything is coming down out of the mountains. We pulled a 400-pound black bear off the 14 freeway this morning. I thanked him and we hung up. That's my story. My dad told me a story his father, my grandfather, had told him. Back in 1955 there was a well in a village in Mexico, and sightings of a black monkey man were reported multiple times. Once my grandfather went out there with a rifle to hunt it. He had told my father that the monkey would beckon at the people gathered to come closer, hand motions, and my grandfather would fire at the monkey beast thing. But the bullets would miss and the monkey would just move out of the way and eventually climb down the well and disappear. Sometimes I wonder if they're physical demons and beasts of old. Why would my grandfather make up stuff? Just to scare kids? Seems kind of pointless. He was a very serious and direct man, not one to make up stories for fun.
I saw Sasquatch on 2 occasions and in 2 different colors. The first one was sitting with his or her back to me on a gas line that was freshly cut at about 4 p.m. and was June. It was sitting on a mound of dirt across the line to deter 4x4 vehicles. That mound was about 50 yards, maybe 75 from the road. It was black, wide-shouldered, big head and no neck. It looked like a mountain gorilla sitting there. The second time I was driving alongside a small creek about 45 minutes before dark to look over in a spot where there was a break in the trees. There stood a gray Sasquatch about 12 feet tall and was standing kind of sideways. It was very close to the road, only about 25 or 30 feet, and was huge. Couldn't make out its face profile. It was very still, and had I not looked at it I would have thought it was an oak tree. Its fur was kind of like the original real tree hunting camouflage. Had some dark stripes, but was mostly gray. I think it may have been older than the first one. It was about 6 miles from the first one I saw and was about 10 years apart. So it possibly could be the same one if they age a little faster than us. The first one looked grown judging by its huge shoulders and head. My dad saw one in 1971 or 1972. It crossed the road in front of his car. He said it was black or very dark brown and about 10 feet tall. He said it crossed the road in 2 strides and ran across 100 feet of dead cornfield in the time it took him to go 60 feet in his car. Said when he got even with where it went across the road it had crossed it and was going into trees on the other side of the field. He said this was before anyone was talking about Bigfoot, and he had no idea what it was on 2 legs like a man and covered in shaggy hair. Later on people saw it a few times. Then about 1.5 miles from where he saw the one crossing the road, a lady that lived alone heard what she thought were raccoons tearing into her garbage cans. Living alone, she had a .38 revolver. She said when she threw the back door open she looked toward the cans and the dark fur-covered man stood up. Her porch was 4 feet off the ground and it was looking eye to eye level at her from just 8 feet. It scared her so bad she emptied her 5 shots into its chest. It yelled and ran into the woods. That was the last time anyone saw it. Dad said it may have died or just learned to be scared of people. They never found it and never saw buzzards. There was a time before that my uncle, his wife and sister-in-law and her boyfriend had an encounter. They were up late. Uncle and aunt went to their bedroom and the sister and boyfriend lay down on the couch. They hadn't been in bed long and my uncle heard something outside the window. My uncle got up and went to the window and put his face close to the glass. Couldn't see anything, but then realized it was because something was looking in. It was a man-like face, he said, and it turned and ran. He yelled and ran into the living room, telling them someone was peeping at them. The boyfriend was a large football player and jumped up, ran out the back door as the thing walked past the door. He ran behind it and said it was running off and moving away from him. So he made a dive toward where a man's shoulders were. When he tried to close his arms, he realized that it was too wide and he was only about its waist. The waist was covered in hair. He slid down the legs and he fell off. It disappeared into the woods. He told everyone there what happened, and my uncle wanted to go around to the window to see if there was something it was standing on. There wasn't, and the window was 8 to 9 feet off the ground. So it was at least 8 or 9 feet tall, but he couldn't see if it was bending over. Later on, in a non-Sasquatch related incident, my other uncle, who lived near the other uncle, had a similar experience. His bedroom window was lower to the ground. He heard a noise, went to look out, and a black bear was standing there on its hind legs looking in. That uncle actually admitted he literally soiled his underwear. We all still laugh about that. But all I can say is Sasquatch is real and not sure they are apes. In my opinion, they are a lingering cousin to modern man and Neanderthal that just wasn't able to breed with modern humans and disappear like Neanderthals.
A few years back we were hunting around the Mount Gleason area of the San Gabriel Mountains, California, when we saw what appeared to be a human with very long kind of reddish/brownish hair take off running across a grassy ridge into a tree-covered canyon where it disappeared. We were pulled over on a dirt road and we were all out of the trucks when we spotted it running. We think it was in some rocks watching us, and when it noticed we had spotted it, that's when he took off running. It covered a good amount of terrain in just a few seconds and was gone. I was hunting last January, 2022, at Ricetown, Kentucky, on private land, deep in the woods. My cousin and I had to get in the tree really early at 3 a.m. My cousin was about half-mile from me. I saw something really weird. That thing was walking like a primate. Wasn't a bear for sure. I freaked out. I didn't move. It was cold, like 23 degrees Fahrenheit. My phone in my pocket. I couldn't grab it to take any photo.
My name is Nate and I had an encounter with Sasquatch that I would like to share with you. It's very short and sweet, but nevertheless, it's my encounter. So I'll begin with the year. It was 2012 and the month was early August. I was 17 years old at the time. 2 years leading up to this I would take a trip from Pennsylvania to Connecticut to visit my aunt and uncle for a week. Every time I'd visit my uncle and I would pick a day to go fishing at a nearby lake called Hall's Pond in Natchog State Forest. We always had awesome luck fishing, catching all sorts of largemouth bass and pickerels. Nothing out of the usual ever happened though. Well, the time I visited in 2012 something strange did happen. We were fishing for my uncle's boat all day at Hall's Pond like we do every year. Towards the end of the day around 7 p.m., we were fishing one of the last shorelines before we called it quits. The entire length of the shoreline that we fished we kept hearing something in the woods walking parallel to us. It was out of sight. We just assumed it was a squirrel or a bird making noise in the leaves. We kept fishing and eventually came to a small cove-like area on the land and continued hearing it. I looked up and behind a tree in front of our boat was something dark black, but I couldn't quite make out exactly what it was. I yelled to my uncle, "Hey look, that's what's making the noise," and pointed towards it. The second I pointed, the black figure ran from behind the trees on 2 legs right along the shoreline in plain sight. It was running on 2 legs with black hair roughly 4 inches long. I never got a good look at his face, but its arms and shoulders really stood out to me. It had long arms that reached below its knees and massive shoulder muscles almost as round as basketballs. It ran so smoothly it almost looked like it was floating through the air. No head bobbing at all when it ran. It ran right in front of us for about 5 solid seconds until it disappeared into the deeper forest. The second we couldn't see it anymore, we noticed that we couldn't hear it making any more noises in the woods. No leaves or sticks breaking. My uncle and I both knew exactly what we saw. I asked my uncle to go to shore for me to investigate a little bit, but my uncle was genuinely scared and refused. He insisted that we go back to the boat ramp and head home. After we loaded the boat up and headed back to his place, he said to me in the truck how he was so happy that I was there to witness that with him. He would go night fishing out there, and he said he had rocks thrown at him while he was on the lake and he would hear weird vocalizations. He believes that there really was a Sasquatch out there, and the sighting in broad daylight that we shared together just put the icing on the cake. We never saw anything else after that encounter, but we will never forget that day.
Having spotted a Sasquatch like a cryptid myself, it's refreshing to have these experts suggest that such creatures can actually exist. The central area of my state, Arizona, is divided by the Mogollon Rim, basically a long cliff that runs along the edge of the Kaibab Plateau. The forests surrounding the rim are said to be the home of the Mogollon Monster, a giant human-shaped beast covered in black fur. One day while I was at Camp Geronimo, a summer camp run by the Boy Scouts of America near Payson, Arizona, I was looking across the ridge over the camp and noticed a massive dark shape walking quickly across the tree line. It was about half the height of the ponderosa pine trees, which I estimated were 30 feet tall. After a few seconds, it darted into the tree line. This was back in the summer of 1989, way before camera phones were invented. The only cellular phones that existed were 6-pound monstrosities that had to be carried with a shoulder strap. I had a small camera with me but had left it in my backpack at the time.
The following story happened to one of my closest friends. It was told to me the next morning as he sat very upset and scared in his kitchen. This affected me deeply as this friend is one of the most fearless and capable people I have ever met. Just to show you how calm and unexcitable he is, I will share one incident from his past. While sleeping in the back of his pickup truck one night in a very remote part of the southeast Idaho desert, he told me that he was startled out of a deep sleep by the uneasy feeling of being watched. Upon opening his eyes, he was surprised to see a gray, hairy man-like face leaning over the side of the pickup bed watching him sleep. He quickly sat upright, startling the creature which he watched bound away in the moonlight through the sagebrush and lava rock. When he told me this, I asked, "What did you do?" He answered, "I went back to sleep. I was tired." As I said, not very excitable. So when I saw him that morning in his kitchen, scared and shaken, it affected me deeply. Here is what happened. My friend and I had just moved to Portland, Oregon after college. One day he asked me if he could borrow my .357 Magnum to take on a deer bow hunting trip. He was planning to go the next weekend near one of the national forests south of Portland, west central Oregon. He didn't think he would need to use it, but was concerned about the large bear population where he would be hunting. I loaned it to him. He arrived at the hunting site deep in the woods at the end of a logging road around twilight. Wanting to start hunting first thing the next morning, he rode his mountain bike in the dark to where he had hung his stand to spread some scent and make sure his shooting lanes were still open, etc. As he was crouched down dribbling dough and heat urine on a bush, he felt the presence of something behind him. He stood and turned, reaching for the only light he had brought with him, one of those little key ring LED lights that turn on when you squeeze it. He squeezed the light on and saw a large set of eyes about 3 feet off the ground reflect back at him. The LED light was too weak to show anything else, just the reflection of those eyes. Thinking it was normal that a bear or deer would mistake him for an animal. After all, he was crouched down and smelled like deer urine. He stood up straight, clapped his hands, and said, "Get out of here," in a firm voice, expecting that the confused animal would bolt away when it realized he was human. His actions did not bring the expected result. Instead of turning and running away, the eyes slowly rose to over 9 feet tall and took a step towards him. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread and quickly pulled the .357 out of the holster. Holding the revolver in one hand and the squeeze LED light in the other, he backed away from the eyes. Every step he took backwards, the eyes matched by advancing towards him, but always staying just out of the ring of light emitted by the keyring. In a short time, he was backed up against a large tree, which he used to protect his back while he watched the eyes observe him from 10 feet away. The eyes would weave back and forth like a large animal adjusting his weight from side to side. They would rise and lower slightly like something was studying him from different angles. Even though he never could actually see the animal, he had the sense of something huge. The way it moved, the sound of the leaves and dander under its feet as it walked, the impressive amounts of air that were inhaled and exhaled as it breathed, and most of all, the height of the eyes as they towered over him all indicated a creature of massive proportions. After an eternity, he lost sight in his eyes, but he could hear the animal circling his position. More than an hour had passed since the last noise or sighting of the eyes. Sitting with his back against the tree and a cocked .357 in his hand, he decided it would be safe to leave the area. It was now around 1 o'clock in the morning. He started walking to where he left his mountain bike. To his dismay, he heard the animal paralleling him in the thick brush. The beast followed him to his bike. Not wanting to lose his sense of hearing, his only warning of the animal's position, he chose to push his bike back to the truck instead of riding it. It took him over 4 hours to push the bike back to his camp. When he thought the animal was too close, judging by the sounds it made in the underbrush, he would stop and wait. Every time he stopped, the animal would inevitably start to circle him again. When it sounded like its circuitous route took it a little farther away, my friend would start pushing his bicycle again, only to repeat the same routine every 10 minutes or so throughout the tortuous night. Finally, after a lifetime, he reached his vehicle and in an adrenaline and panic-induced sprint he threw his bike in the back, started the truck and headed down the mountain. It took several miles before the heavy sense of doom started to recede. As the adrenaline wore off, the shakes started. He started shaking so bad that it was all he could do to keep his truck on the road until he pulled up to his house and into a kitchen chair. That is where I found him, a while later, when I went over to his house to feed and water his dog. After he told me what had happened to him, I offered to go back with him and retrieve his camping gear and tree stand. He refused the offer and left his possessions to nature rather than return to the area. It's at that point that he said that he was sure that it was a Sasquatch. Even though he hunts and fishes as avidly as ever, he will never go back to that spot and avoids the entire region passionately.
It's been many years since this happened to me, and I had originally thought a mountain lion was the cause of it. But now I am not so sure about the mountain lion. In the early 1990s, my best friend and I went camping. It was the weekend before Memorial Day, and we were camping at a small campground off the road between Lake Castaic and Lake Hughes in Southern California. The first night was so annoying due to all the gang bangers from LA showing up and making noise all night that we packed up and left on Saturday morning. I had heard about a place called Sawmill Mountain from one of my coworkers and it was close by, so we headed up there. Sawmill Mountain is off the road between Lake Hughes and Gorman, and to get there you need to travel several miles from the turn-off unimproved dirt roads to the campground. When we got there it was midday on Saturday and we were the only people in the campground. The elevation was about 5,000 feet and it was nice and cool up there with a nice view of the valley down below. It was a great campground. We pitched our tents and set up camp, then ate some lunch and sat down to relax in the shade. My buddy went inside his tent and took a nap and I went to my tent and did the same. After a short nap I decided to do a little exploring. About 25 yards from our campsite was a trail and I walked on it for about 150 yards. Off to the side of the trail, along the tree line, I heard something moving and looked in the direction. I thought I caught a glimpse of something light-colored, but it stopped moving. I was still in condition white and didn't think anything was wrong. So I kept walking a few more yards. I was noticing that the wildflowers were blooming everywhere and enjoying the views when all of a sudden, I began to think of that movie, Predator, where the monster could see people, but they couldn't see him. Then I noticed that everything had gone absolutely quiet. No insects, no birds chirping, nothing. I did a 360-degree turn and didn't see anything. I guess maybe the sudden silence had triggered some primordial fight/flight response in me that made me think of that movie. Anyway, I was armed at the time with a Smith & Wesson 10mm and I made sure I had my hand on it. The gun gave me absolutely no comfort whatsoever. The feeling of dread and despair was so immense that I felt panic. I felt frozen in place for a few moments. Then that little voice in the back of my head kicked in and said, "Get out of there now." I didn't run because all I could think about was a mountain lion and running would make it chase me. I couldn't see what was watching/stalking me, and you can't shoot what you can't see. I started calling out to my buddy as loud as I could and walked quickly back to camp. Even after I got back there I still felt pretty freaked out. My buddy was there drinking a beer and I told him what had happened. "While you were napping in your tent I did the same thing," he said. "I felt the same way you did. I have never felt a feeling of dread like that before and haven't since. It was so powerful it was crippling." The rest of the weekend was uneventful. Some a-hole in a Subaru Brat came up and drove around the campground like he was in the Baja 500 around sundown, but nothing else happened. It was a great place to camp, but neither of us went anywhere alone. We'd been back several more times for weekend campouts with larger groups of friends and nothing odd had happened. Then one campout, with the same buddy a couple years later, something happened. Once again, we were the only two up there. I think we played hooky from work and gone up midweek. Anyway, we had a campfire going and had just polished off a couple of thick rib eyes. I believe it was summer at the time. I was telling my buddy what a big wall of flame a 10mm would produce and he said let's see it. So I shot off a magazine from it. As predicted, lots of flame and noise. I holstered the gun and sat down by the fire. "You remember that creepy feeling when we first discovered this place?" my buddy says to me. I said that I did. "It's back." I didn't pick up on it this time, but he did. We both had our guns out and flashlights in our hands and my buddy thought whatever was causing it was watching us from beyond the camp. We walked toward it, shining our lights up in the trees thinking it was a cougar or bobcat, but there was nothing. About 10 yards from camp all of a sudden, something growled at us. I won't repeat what my buddy said, but we hightailed it back to camp as quickly as we could. When we got there we lit every lantern we had and threw a bunch of termite-eaten pine wood into the fire to get things as bright as we could. That night was a tough one to sleep through, but nothing bothered us after that. Fast forward to about 3 weeks ago. I was talking to my buddy by text message about what we've been calling the ghost of Sawmill Mountain, and I had said I thought it was a mountain lion. What he said blew my mind. He is pretty sure it was a Sasquatch that day, many years ago. He pointed me to a bunch of Bigfoot websites and I did some reading and, I have to say, I'm starting to agree with him. From everything I've read, they stay close enough to us that they can keep an eye on us and, unlike the hippie view that they're the gentle guardians of the forest, they're actually an apex predator. I think on that day, I was either on the menu or had made the thing by scaring off what it was after. I also think the growl a couple of years later was a gentle reminder to stop making so much racket in its territory and stay in our campsite. Also, I found out that the Pacific Crest Trail that runs from Mexico to Canada through California, Oregon, and Washington cuts right through the Sawmill Mountain Campground. And the websites that track Bigfoot sightings have had a few in the general area. I live in Arizona now, but I'd like to go back there someday to look for evidence of stick structures and other signs. Anyway, that's my story.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.